getting the band back together.
The hottest, hippest, and most destructive band in history is ready for an encore. Yes! Blues Brothers 2000, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, February 6th.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cinemarcade 2000. This is the podcast where we talk about movies, video games, and the sparks that fly when those two worlds collide. My name is Steve Gutley, and thanks to this movie that we watched today, I learned that the way to update something and make it seem cool and relevant is to add 2000 after it. That's really all you need to do.
You also need to add magic?
Yes, you do need to add magic, which is a good thing because I have two voodoo-cursed zombies here that I now command to tell their names.
I am Justin, but I'm actually not a zombie. I'm a skeleton.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Look, it's very different, and I appreciate
it's
you.
It's a whole different vibe. I understand.
Yeah. I'm trying.
And I'm J-Man.
Who's just a zombie. She's not going to fight me on that. Just a zombie. We're all zombies here. We are talking today about Blues Brothers 2000. This is closing out yet another miniseries for us, another little two-episode, 1-2 punch, where we're bunching together the two movies of a property and talking about them all in one big chunk, so it's all fresh and relevant. And peek behind the curtain for those of you listening, it's late and we are tired, and these two were kind enough to come over and do a bonus episode so that we didn't fall behind because I'm anal retentive. So we're all a little slap happy. And I think it's for the better because this is not a movie that you need to be 100% alert for.
I'm definitely a little nap happy.
A little nap happy, a little slap
nappy. Fell asleep with the dog. It was a good time.
That was very true.
Yeah, this movie was an experience.
A great experience.
You know.
Oh, okay. All right. So we're already coming out countering the common opinion of this movie.
I'm starting to think I've seen this movie before a long time ago, and I'm starting to think that I fell asleep in the middle of it.
Okay,
because
that's fair.
Some of it seemed familiar, and some of it really didn't.
I mean,
the back half.
The back half is it seems like it is from a very different movie than the rest of the movie. Bizarrely and kind of astounding my expectations, I think I'm coming down on J-Band's side on this movie a little bit too. I had a really good time watching this movie, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out some of its flaws. First, let's learn a little bit about this movie. It's called Blues Brothers 2000, but it was released February 6th, 1998. It's directed by John Landis and once again written by Landis and Dan Aykroyd. And it stars Dan Aykroyd, John Goodman, Joe Morton, J. Evan Bonifant, Nia Peoples, Kathleen Freeman, Daryl Hammond, the Blues Brothers Band. And it has appearances by Aretha Franklin, James Brown, Erykah Badu, Blues Traveler, B.B. King, Wilson Pickett, and so goddamn many amazing musicians that turned up for this movie. It is,
and some definitely like blues bona fides like Bo Diddley and Coco Taylor.
Oh my god, yeah, some huge names going on in here.
And there also felt like there was a lot more actual blues music in this one.
There actually is, yeah, you're right. There's definitely more like authentic blues music and not just soul music. Yeah, this movie was obviously a very long time in the making. It's a sequel that came 18 years after the original, so that's quite a large gap. And you might argue that the sequel is not strictly necessary or was necessarily being asked for, given that half of the titular duo was no longer alive. So it's kind of, how are you going to sort of recapture the magic? And I think that the answer, and I like I said, I'm coming down like favorably on this movie overall, but I think we do need to acknowledge that this is basically just the same movie again. Right? Like, this is kind of just
There's
the
no
same
mission
movie.
from God this time.
There's no mission
there's
from
no
God.
divine
But there
mission.
is God.
There is God. Yeah, we do prove that God exists.
Somebody...
With a killer song, so good they played it twice in the opening, John the Revelator, and in the gospel scene, John the Revelator.
Yeah,
such a fucking slap.
It's a great song.
He definitely, I think he got a mission from God.
Yeah,
but
he definitely
the
did.
Blues Brothers, and by that I mean the Blues Brother, did not.
The one that is still with us. Yeah, I mean this movie, if you want an idea of how long this was in development, the character of Buster Blues was originally supposed to be Macaulay Culkin.
Oh, wow.
And by the time this movie came out, Macaulay Culkin was already like retired, basically. Like he'd stopped. They were trying to get him like at the height of his popularity, so 93, 94. It took a long time to get this done. Now, the original pitch that they had was that Dan Aykroyd and John Goodman were going to team up with Jim Belushi, who has actually toured with the Blues Brothers on stage before. He goes by the name of Brother Z Blues. But he was unavailable to appear in the film because he had a contract with for a TV pilot, and so they couldn't go ahead with it. But also the network, ironically, the studio rejected their initial pitch, which was that the three of them are going to be trying to save the orphanage because they thought it was too similar to the original. But they still kind of went pretty damn similar to the original. So it's still not clear on why they went with this title, because the movie was never intended to be released in the year 2000. Like, it was not something that they just like loved so much they wanted to release early. So it's a bit of a confusing title.
They made the movie and then we're trying to figure out what to call it, and they're like, well, if we say 2000, maybe 2 years from now, the remote control car technology will be available and it'll make more sense.
Absolutely. And I think the big question that everybody had when they were seeing this and why it didn't do well at the box office is because nobody knew if they needed to watch the previous 1,999 Blues Brothers. Like, it's kind of a big commitment.
I had the same problem with 101 Dalmatians.
What was your experience with this, Steve? Did you watch it when you were a kid?
This was the movie I watched before the original Blues Brothers. Yeah, which I think might be true for all of us.
Most people.
Was that true for you as well?
I can't remember which one I watched first. Like, I've definitely, both of them came alive in my consciousness at the same time.
Yeah, because I think my parents rented this one like because they had nostalgia for the first movie and they liked it, and then they rented the first one after that. They couldn't remember if it was like a really hard R-rated movie or not.
And again, as I mentioned last week, the Blues, the Hot Band Boys really loved the Blues Brothers and quote it excessively. So, but I also got the CD to this one, and I was shocked. I remembered every single song, every single lyric. It was like I was just singing along, bopping my feet. Like, I was like, Nassau got funky, Nassau got soul, along with the whole thing. It's like the last 20 years have not existed. It was like I was completely on board and I knew every lyric.
So is that how long it's been since you watched this and you still just knew it all?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, but you probably listened to the soundtrack.
I listened to the sound. I told you before. I wore both of the CDs out. I listened to them so much.
Absolutely.
I love how absolutely different of CDs we owned as kids.
You had very, very different CDs.
Yeah.
I mean, I admit to owning some of your CDs when I was in high school. But
Linkin Park, Billy Talent, Megadeth. It was a very different genre.
Did you own Cake?
I did.
Yes.
Well, no, I own Cake now. I should clarify. I was not cool enough then. Now I'm really cool.
Frank Sinatra.
As an
from
adult,
Cake was
I appreciate Cake.
One of my theme.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that. I mean, I went kind of hog wild with my CDs once I hit like high school and like they started becoming more cheap and my music taste started getting more eclectic. I do remember that the very first CD that I bought with my own money was Phil Collins' No Jacket Required.
Oh, man.
Because I have Benjamin Button's disease and I'm aging in reverse. I was an 80-year-old man at birth.
Mine was Linkin Park's Hybrid Theory.
Not even the good. No, Hybrid Theory is the good one.
It's the first one.
Yeah, that's the good one. Meteor is the bad one.
My sister
Meteor is
had
good.
the I know that weird. You mail away when you get you
Like the
pay
Kids
the
Club?
Columbia House,
Yeah.
and so I would beg her to let me get her cheap CDs, and I would try to get soundtracks because I love soundtracks, and also No Doubt.
Oh, No Doubt was an early CD for me.
Yeah.
Tragic Kingdom was a very early CD. It was Tragic Kingdom and the Goo Goo Dolls. I bought them both from a Columbia Records.
When I
Wow, this
hit
is
the
a tangent,
point,
but yeah.
when I hit the point that I could actually buy music, I hit the point where the internet hit the point where I could just find music, YouTube, LimeWire, Apple Music. Like, all of these things were beyond the early stages of music is accessible digitally now.
Yeah.
And there was a period of time where I I would go to my iTunes library and I would hit the recently purchased and I would just hit shuffle. And just be like, whatever I bought in the last 3 months, I'm just going to listen to that on shuffle.
So it's interesting. The soundtrack for Blues Brothers 2000 did go gold.
It did. The soundtrack was far more successful than the film.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. 'Cause the film, I think, it cost like $50 million or something, and it made like 14. It was a
No, it's they made it was cost 30 million, and they made 32 million.
Oh right, yeah. Internationally, they made 32.
So they
kind of just eked it out, but it also gets complicated because like with budget you double it.
Marketing, like I really do wish like it's very frustrating that when they talk about budget, they don't include marketing because it's really hard to judge a film success without the complete budget total being.
Yeah, you just have to infer, and so the rule with box office is like double the amount that they say it costs because that's about what it costs.
I
to
feel
market
like
most movies.
Depending on the situation, though, it could be a little less cut and dry.
Yeah,
because for marketing, sometimes depending on what it is, they could market something related to the movie that's not the movie. But then, at what point do you draw that line to have a consistent ruling? Whereas if you go by just box office, then at least you know that the number from each movie is going to be pulled from the same data and not subjective.
Like most recently, we have the Barbie movie, which is an unqualified success, but at the same time,
it was everywhere.
It was marketed well, and they also got a lot of free marketing because Margot Robbie, as a spokeswoman, like wearing different outfits, was like all over. I consumed that
social media as a whole.
Hard.
The last like 2 to 3 weeks has just been a lot of Barbie.
Yeah. Well, it's hard because like some of it's marketing and some of it's actual social media, ground floor, grassroots. People love this movie, so they're sharing it and they're resharing and they're resharing these like internet memes and like creating, and it's only gotten more intensified after the movie.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of that is built into the cost, and most movies aren't going to have that same experience of being so overly marketed. I think this movie in particular, they kind of tried to bury because it doesn't seem like anybody involved with this.
It's a February release.
A February release is not a vote of confidence, and it doesn't seem like anybody was particularly happy with how the movie turned out because John Landis and Dan Aykroyd wanted to make another R-rated comedy. Not, again, the Blues Brothers is an R-rated comedy. It's not like super hardcore.
It's mostly
anything,
language.
But it's got some language, that's about it.
Okay, it's got some language. The amount of scantily clad women in this, and not just
There's
like
more in this,
snippets. There's like 2 full musical numbers with scantily clad women, like just
at a strip club,
like yes,
a classy strip club,
exotic dancers. And I don't have a problem with scantily clad women, but it just seems like they would have gotten chilly.
Right, a weird double standard because apparently the studio insisted that this movie focus more on fantasy elements and be more accessible to kids, hence the addition of a child Blues Brother.
That is exactly what I would say the first Blues Brothers needed, was more fantasy elements and a kid.
Obviously, every movie is improved by a precocious moppet.
This is an interesting thing because I discussed this with my flatmate. Promise you, listeners, someday you'll meet him.
Yes, he is real.
I don't know. I've never met them.
I personally don't always like the precocious child trope. No. However, my flatmate loves the surrogate father trope. And so these are battling tropes. And I do think the Blues Brothers 2000 straddles a fine line because this child can sing and this child can dance.
Okay, I'm going to push back on this real quick. Okay, I want to talk about Buster Blues because I left this movie, as I did the first time I watched it, I left this movie feeling like this kid is a cipher. Like, we never really get the moment where they bond. We never really get the moment where, like, he needs to endear himself, or we never get to see him discovering blues or revealing that he has this great talent. Like, he only sings at the very end, and he's not, like, I'm not trying to be mean to a kid, but, like, it's a normal singing voice.
Well, no, and I'm just saying that he's not bad.
No,
like,
he's not
and that's
bad, no.
so that my bar for precocious children is very low.
And he also wasn't very precocious, especially towards the protagonist, towards the Blues Brothers and everyone else. He was mostly precocious to the people that they were being precocious to, and it was like, all right.
I mean, most of the time he's just kind of there.
Yeah,
and
he-
not really contributing much. But,
unlike
I
in
think
some-
had he really brought the house down with his when he like debuted his singing voice, that would have kind of justified his existence a little bit. But he's just like an enthusiastic kid. And that's about all.
At least-
like,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to pick on a child actor. It's not
Yeah.
his fault here. He's perfectly fine. He's a great dancer. I don't believe he actually played that harmonica. but
No, he
still.
did not play that
Yeah.
harmonica.
Still.
At least there wasn't any scenes where he was directly irrationally stopping them from doing things.
That's true.
He was always along for the ride, and at times directly helpful.
Sleeping in the trunk of the car.
Yeah,
with
he
a very
slept-
nice setup.
He slept a lot, but then he pickpocketed the police colonel to get his wallet,
Yeah.
so they could buy the car.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple of other times where he directly participated in hijinks, or he gave Elwood a motivational speech to get Elwood to give everyone else a motivational speech.
Right.
Like he was a part of the group and not
But
an
he's so
opposing force.
He's so much more subdued, and I feel like
Oh, yeah.
the same thing can be like the only one of the Blues Brothers that gets an arc in this movie is Cab.
I
Because-
disagree. I think is it John Goodman?
Mac,
Yeah.
yeah, Mighty Mac.
Mighty Mac. He starts off as a bartender, and then he's like, "Oh, you can sing, man." And then like he's actually, I feel like he's criminally underused in this movie.
Yes.
Because he's such a. Do you believe it when he hugs the little boy even more than Elwood? Like their hug has more meaning than the Elwood and him hugging, because well, that's not who Elwood is. And,
No.
and so I just like, and this is the thing is like sometimes about like this movie doesn't really have character arcs except for they try to shoehorn like family, like found family in at the end.
Yeah.
With Buster, which again I personally think there exists in the world in some alternate universe where this movie was made without that child.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been a better movie.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree. John Goodman, criminally underused. I think he is kind of filling this role because they're like, all right, we need like a big guy who can sing and exude a little bit more warmth than Elwood does, you know, because
Yeah.
that slot has been lost. And so it feels like once they filled that slot, they didn't bother developing him any further because his arc is just bartender who wants to sing becomes a singer, and that happens.
And that-
immediately.
yes.
We don't see the tension growing.
I think that this movie probably should have been named Blues Brother and Friends because it's genuinely, the movie is about Elwood and the movie is about him getting people to do stuff with him, and that's it. Like, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily about the people, similar to in the Blues Brothers. Once they get the band members on their side, the band members just become background characters.
Yes.
They don't really get a whole lot other than the occasional, like, why are we doing this? And then it's not even a major thing that often. Like, nobody gets a major part after that.
No.
Except for like when they're playing the music, they're out on the stage.
Yeah,
But
And I get
absolutely,
it's a lot of characters to balance, and I get that. And
It
I
is,
get
Well,
the
I
need
think-
for efficiency, but here's
they
the thing.
they only took one character and looked at them, and then Elwood didn't even have a journey or growth during the movie.
No, not really.
Didn't even really have much
Well,
of one
and
in the first
Elwood,
movie.
I would say
but-
Elwood is more of a cardboard cutout of Elwood compared to the first movie.
Yeah.
Because like at least he hits on that girl. He's got some game of his own.
Riz, as the kids call it.
Yeah.
he has some objective.
Well, he has an objective, and he and I do think this movie suffers from not having a mission from God. And I'm not saying that they necessarily needed to repeat the same thing, but like it would have been great if they got one reason to put the band back together. Like, I mean, even if it was earlier on, if he like, oh no, I've heard about this battle of the bands from like all my time in prison, and I've always really wanted to go. Something as simple as that, I think, would have been a little bit nicer to hang their hat on.
Right, because I was taking notes while watching this, and I'm like, I realized that if you speak kind of broadly, you can describe the plot of this, and it's the exact same as the first one. So follow me along here. Elwood gets released from prison. He visits the nun, decides to do a show. He gets the band back together. They have to coax Matt and Lou away from Aretha Franklin. They need to disrupt Mr. Fabulous at his respectable new job by doing something embarrassing. They need to get mistaken for a country western act. They evade enemies, including criminals and law enforcement. They run afoul,
and racists.
They run afoul of some racists. The chief racist gets killed by a vehicle falling from a great height. They engage in a massive car chase, and all of this culminates in a big performance with a bunch of blues and souls luminaries. That's the same movie twice. The slight details change, such as magic being a very prominent and very real part of this movie.
But only for like 25 to 30 of the movie's 2-hour runtime. There's no magic the rest of it, except for maybe when he gets called upon by Jesus or whatever and he flies up in the air.
Yeah, I think that's about where the magic starts. Before then, you can interpret everything as like, this is a musical number, this is, it breaks away from the diegesis. But then in that scene where he literally gets sucked into the sky, turned into a blues brother, and returned to the ground, from then on, it is just pure comic book like magic stuff.
The general plot of this particular movie to me kind of reminds me of the World's End from the Cornetto trilogy.
Yeah.
Of where it's one guy getting his bros back together just because.
Yeah.
And it's not even necessarily because it's in their best interest or because there's a real reason to do it. But it's just like, this is the thing that I do. This is what I do. I have to get the boys back together.
Yeah, I think I did miss why they needed to win the Battle of the Bands. What were the stakes here?
Because he wanted to get the band together to be a working band again, and he needed to justify to the band that they could get paid and that this could be a job.
Okay, so it wasn't like a save the orphanage kind of moment.
No.
Because they established the orphanage is
It
gone.
was very selfishly driven of I want the band to get back together.
I don't think that's the end of the world. If
And it's
that
not.
was his
It's
thing,
not.
I just think that the problem is Elwood is not a loquacious person.
No.
But at the same time, I think that they could have been like, like I've been in prison and all I've thought about was getting the band back together, and I think that would be perfectly legitimate. Now, moving on to the fucking soundtrack.
Yeah, okay, we need to talk about the soundtrack because all these little quibbles that we poke into the plot holes of this movie, and there are many, those can kind of go away when you think about just the sheer amount of talent that's on display in this movie. We do have the returning kind of gratuitous guest stars. I think everybody but Ray Charles of the surviving people came back. But then we supplement Ray Charles with Wilson Pickett and Eddie Floyd. And
I
Junior
love that
Wells.
song and I love that dance number.
Yeah.
The Love Line. Oh my gosh, I had so much fun singing along to that, and then looking at all the ladies in their house coats dancing on top of desks. It was just like so delightful. Oh, so good.
And it was just such a weird moment to be in the middle of this movie. It's like we're going to visit a phone sex line where it's a bunch of like frumpy middle-aged ladies pretending to be like porn stars.
And
it was a weird kind of
it was
digression.
also
it was just setting up that song basically.
The color scheme was also drastically. It was very bright and popping, kind of like the like Aretha Franklin and her friends.
Yeah.
But the rest of the movie's a little more on like the drab side.
It's a little
And
made
so
for TV looking, right?
It was fun. It was very fun to go from this drab to like, we're gonna have some good music, we're gonna have some bright colors, and we're gonna have some fun here.
I just realized I was wrong. The church moment is not the moment where you go full magic. It's Riders on the Storm when they summon literally ghost cowboy demons. from the
Ghost
sky
cowboys from the sky with horse snorting fire and brands made of steel.
that caused it to rain. So they had an actual impact on the real world, which means they broke the barrier.
As I was watching that scene, granted, again, this is before the rest of the magic, I was just like, okay, they're just playing the music and a storm's happening, and this is like imagination. Like this isn't what's actually happening, because nobody was reacting to the horses in the sky. They were just reacting to, oh, it's kind of windy out here.
Yeah.
And so in my head, I was like, oh, okay, this is just cool imagery to go with the song. It was like watching a music video,
Yeah.
you know, that didn't actually happen. And so I never even thought about it in the context of, hey, music is real. Or magic music is real.
Music is
We
real.
never would have known. But that magic was actually going to happen and not just be tricks in the sky.
I mean, but again, magic happened earlier because we got to hear the pop stylings of Blues Traveler. Who I owned a Blues Traveler CD, to get back to CD conversation. But yeah. That was, again, just a random non sequitur. Hi, we're a blues band at this motel. We're big fans of you. Can we play a music video as you leave?
Well, and I think that's the thing, is that if they had dialed up the eccentricity in the magic, and like if they made it more camp, if they dialed up maybe 4 notches, I think this movie would be a cult classic today, in the way that the original is a cult classic. But they just needed to, like, the music is a classic, but they could have made the movie a classic by dialing up that sort of eccentricity.
Kind of to the level of like Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think the studio made a very big miscalculation in trying to make this a kids movie, because they didn't even really commit to that.
No.
They wanted it to be something that would appeal to kids. But I cannot think of, except for hot band guys. I can't think of anything like that.
They still dropped some shits around, and they wasn't like, this movie would have, was this PG-13?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, but it's just, it's not so much about the music. It's mostly that this is a movie with a lot of old people.
Yeah, the kids aren't going to,
kid who
like,
hangs
look,
out with old people.
I can't appreciate all of the names that you've been saying because I don't know who these people are, other than like having heard a couple of their names before. So like when you're saying all of these things, I'm like, I don't know which person you're talking about in the movie.
Well, so like
but,
I do think the female representation was a lot better, because blues started off as like in the 1920s as like female blues musicians like revolutionized music, and then there's a huge shift away from female blues musicians, even though that they're literally the source of most modern pop music. And so Coco Taylor and Erykah Badu, like, it's nice that, and Aretha Franklin, it's nice that they had, I mean, again, it's not 50-50.
No.
It's a far cry from 50-50, but still, it's really like Coco Taylor's the queen of the blues. Like, I almost made you listen to one of her songs, Insane Asylum, before we started, because I was like, you guys don't understand this woman's voice.
Which person was Coco Taylor?
She was the older woman who sings in the Louisiana Gator Boys. At the end, she's wearing this red dress with lots of beading on it.
Gotcha.
All right, I have, just for blues fans out there, I have the full lineup here of the Louisiana Gator Boys, just so you know how stacked this concert is at the end of the movie. This full band is Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood, B.B. King, Isaac Hayes, Dr. John, Charlie Musselwhite, Gary U.S. Bonds, Bo Diddley, Clarence Clemens, Lou Rawls, Coco Taylor, Travis Tritt, Jimmy Vaughn, Willie Weeks, Jack Jeanette, Jeff Skunk Baxter, Tommy Pipes McDonald, Grover Washington Jr., and Paul Schaefer. That's like a ridiculous amount of people to
Paul
cram
Schaefer
onto
was
stage.
the musical producer, and I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, he actually played in the original Blues Brothers band when he was on SNL, but he couldn't do the movie the first time around. So he made sure that he got into the movie this time, and so he got to play the Master of Ceremonies and do a very goofy Cajun accent. And he was having a lot of fun. But I have a distinct memory of watching this movie with my mom, and like they get to this part, they play that music, and they're like, oh, well, they don't deserve to, like, the Blues Brothers don't deserve to win.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? How are the Blues Brothers going to top this? And then they don't, to be fair. They don't win. Because, of course, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But they still have a good time.
They still have a good time. Well, and it's like...
But they also, at no point is money ever mentioned, so I'm going to guess that they probably don't have money.
They don't, but, you know...
They definitely didn't get paid from the one show where the hurricane appeared over them.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, like, not to transition from music, because I'm going to definitely go back to music.
No, please.
Is that the level... I'm a little sad and a little shocked that I missed all the car chases.
Yeah.
I like in the original it was sprinkled throughout. In this one they just have one massive pile up.
Yeah, and it is an incredible amount of cars, you know, and it's they specifically, we mentioned last time, they used 104 cars to beat the record from the original film, which was 103. But yeah, like you said, it's the first movie that's over a couple of car chases that are spread throughout. You have the mall scene and then the downtown Chicago scene, you know, and there's a dynamism to those car chases, and this one, it literally just looks like cars are being catapulted into a big pile, like
Yeah.
off screen. Like it's kind of funny the way it looks.
It's
like somebody's
gratuitous.
throwing it, but it is also like, all right, let's just get this all out of the way here, you know. And it is an impressive amount of carnage,
Well,
but it still feels a little.
And
fun.
I don't want to transition to the game, but not a single one of these games, one like the NES, the Super NES, or the Nintendo 64, had a car chase.
Insane.
They didn't even have a car.
Yeah, there should be at least one vehicular stage or something, you know, or like,
Or at
yeah.
least, like, you know, at the start of a stage, the car's in the background. Like, hey, we just got here from the car. But
Yeah.
at no
Yeah,
point.
literally, the Bluesmobile has no feature in any of the games.
No, which feels like a missed opportunity. I mean, you know, so yeah, we were talking about the music. Like, again, the Blues Brothers are kind of the least interesting performers in the Blues Brothers movie, which is sort of like the point, but they get a little bit more to do. We haven't really mentioned Joe Morton. He gets to play Cab in this movie. He's the one who gets like an arc. He's the long lost son of Curtis, their janitor, kind
Yeah.
of father figure. He's now a police officer, and he spends most of the movie chasing them until he has this literal come to Jesus moment. He turns into a Blues Brother, and then they just go on from there. I love Joe Morton. I think he's amazing. I grew up watching movies with him in it because he's the captain in Speed, and he's Miles Dyson in Terminator 2. So like he was in these movies that were on heavy rotation for me.
His death in Terminator 2, gutted.
The slow
Absolute.
gasps
Oh
as he drops
God,
the-
it's just
yeah.
like a fish dying. It's just like so fucking sad. Ooh,
He's real good. I love Joe Morton, and he's a good singer. Like they actually offered to let him join the Blues Brothers band in real life after this, and he opted against it just because he wanted to focus on acting. But he's good, and he's fun, and it is nice that there's like a person of color in the mix finally, because the Blues Brothers do appropriate a lot of black music. Like they're making it popular in a way, but they are also appropriating a lot of that culture.
To be fair, most of the band is diverse. However, it does not center around any of them. So,
No, only two guys. It's all white guys except for two.
is it?
Yeah, kind of a not
three
very diverse.
technically in
I was gonna
this.
say, I feel like
Oh yeah, I guess three. Yeah, but yeah, it took a while.
I guess,
and I
yeah.
think that was something that they were focusing on early on in this movie when developing. Like, yeah, if we're gonna add a Blues Brother, let's make him an African American man, and like we could have a little representation.
unless you're playing the game, in which case the Blues Brothers band is not even human.
Yes, yeah, they are.
It's just a random
a
assortment.
couple of bonies. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, do we have? Are we ready to transition the game? Do we have anything more to say about the movie?
I feel like we probably could talk about the movie for a while.
There's a lot going on in this movie.
I want to talk a little bit about the character arc. So he starts off as a commander in the Illinois State Police, this
Yeah.
this big enemy, which I just think that is like, I see why they did it, but I think it would have been just a better, like, again, Monday morning quarterbacking this movie like crazy, which I normally don't do, but like I just think if he was just a person, I think it would probably have been a more compelling story than to him. Like his whole change, his whole arc is like a revelation from God.
Yeah.
And like that, it's not like him gradually like listening to the music and
Oh,
getting
no.
moved by the music. It's literally a revelation from God, and literally he doesn't even change his own clothes.
No.
They're divinely changed. I mean, if I listened to James Brown and the incredible choir, who knows what would happen to me? Maybe my clothes would change. But but it was just like real wild. Like
Yeah.
and it's also super weird. Like again with this legality thing, being like, oh, he kidnapped a child. What?
Are we?
The nun asked him to take care of the kid for a while.
2 hours. Yeah,
hours.
she
That
asked
is
him
fair.
for 2 hours, and then the child disappears. And it's just like, I know there's a lot of magical realism at this era in the late 90s, early aughts, where like children were just like, well, I mean, that goes back to the 80s and like before.
Yeah.
But like these magical children who are just like, I'm just tagging along.
I'm just a little moppet. I want to learn from you. I'm gonna be Mr. Blues. Yeah, no, that's my perfect impression of Buster Blues. I nailed it right there, man. People don't need to watch the movie anymore. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. Like, yeah, I don't think the kid really adds anything to the dynamic. But like, the Blues Brothers bits are good. You know,
Yeah.
they're fine. They're fun.
Well, and I really I loved the cowboy dancing and I love Funky Nassau, as I mentioned earlier, because like he lists all the very non-blues genres that the Blues Brothers plays in, but has like, we'll never do Caribbean, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't know, I just thought that joke was really funny because like we've mentioned it before, is like they do go very far afield.
And they did have a moment earlier where like Elwood's giving his whole speech and he's railing against all modern music and just saying like, we're just leaving kids with like soulless pop and hip hop music and stuff like that. And I'm just like, all right, we don't need to be so grouchy about this.
Yeah,
because your whole thing was embracing like a musical genre that you love. So it's like, why are you dumping on everybody else?
And this movie suffered a lot from just never committing enough to plot ideas and plot lines. For instance, with Cab.
Yeah.
There were things where like he was calling his mom and trying to figure out if this story was true about him being actually having a different father. And at no point do they actually commit to that enough to show growth.
Yeah.
It's just he doesn't believe them. He doesn't believe them. Presumably he finds out the truth. But then he's still like, he doesn't change until he hears somebody sing. Like, nothing, there's never anything that he initiates that, and it's the same with, like, everybody, pretty much. There's nothing that, with the kid, there's not enough with the kid. There's just so many things that they
I love
didn't
it when
go
Aretha
into.
Franklin sings Respect, and then at the end, she's like, oh, if you're going to be a sad sack about it, you can just go.
Yeah.
I mean, look, it's one of those weird things where, like, the first movie was not tightly plotted either. You know,
but
it
it
was
felt-
very sloppy, but it
It felt way better.
It had a little bit more like youthful energy to it, and there's just kind of a tinge of sadness about them coming back 20 years later.
I think as much as we criticize the length of the last one, I do think the first one feels shorter than the second one.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of the action. Like there's action and the musical numbers, and they sort of, and there's by underusing John Goodman, they really don't show off the dynamism between the Blues Brothers, and the compatibility. Like they should have shown a lot more back and forth talking between the brothers, and really like, or I know they're not brothers, but like between the. I don't know.
They had
Between Blues Brother and Friends.
Yeah, they had a comfortability between Belushi and Aykroyd. Like that,
Yeah.
It felt a little more lived
In this
and,
movie-
and these characters explicitly have no shared history. They're all new to each other.
They have no shared history, and in the first movie you have some banter, even if it's just nothing talk. It's like they're not talking about anything relevant or important. In this movie, they never do that.
I love like Cheaper to Keep Her is it was a great song.
Yeah, like I've always liked John Goodman, and just like you
He's the
said,
best.
sorely underutilized.
Oh my god. Did you guys see him as a villain in that Underground movie?
13
Cloverfield Lane.
Yes.
Oh,
That's my favorite performance.
I
of
loved
his.
it
He's
so much.
so
It's
scary
such a
in
good performance, and like it's just like, oh my god, he's like, I just, horror always gets short drifted or short thrifted at the Oscars, but like I just think that man deserves an Oscar for that movie.
I was really hoping that he was going to cross over for that one. Yeah, that movie is so good. He was in that.
That was one of the, because again, we didn't watch a ton of movies with my parents. That I watched that one with my mom, and I think my mom was like into it, which is unusual because usually she's doing something else while we watch a movie or whatever.
Yeah.
She's not super into it. There was a Harry Potter marathon at one point, and she's like, I couldn't tell you what happens in any of these movies. And I'm like, you have seen each one of these at least 6 times over the course of your lifetime, and you don't remember anything that happens in any of them? Like,
Yeah.
same thing with
think
Lord of
that's
the Rings. Like, she's like, she doesn't pay attention to movies. And so it was just wild to me. But this one, she was like in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, John Goodman deserves better.
yeah.
Presumably.
I think he does well
I'm pretty
for
sure.
himself. I think he does well for himself.
He's doing what he can.
He hasn't had any incidents or anything, right?
Nope.
Okay.
Like even going back to
Good.
like Roseanne did.
Oh yeah, she did. But
No,
and that's when I got introduced to him. My family loved watching Roseanne, and so that was my John Goodman introduction. I was like, this guy's great.
No, he seems chill. Like
seems chill.
He's been very open about. He's had a lot of struggles with alcohol, and he's been in recovery for that. I think he's doing very well.
There was one point that I wanted to make that you touched on a little bit, which was in the first movie, and again, I do not remember their names. Is it Willie and Aretha Franklin?
No,
Matt
Matt.
Guitar Murphy.
Matt and Aretha Franklin. In the first movie, it was like, as I was watching that scene, I was like, is this their relationship and it's fun and they're just like ribbing with each other, or is he kind of being a dick? But this one really kind of hammered home the, oh, fine, you go do the thing.
Yeah.
It really felt like their relationship was healthy and positive, and they did like genuinely like, all right, go have fun.
It's 18 years later. They're still together. They're successful business people.
And so I thought that the way that they handled that was cute. I loved when she just like, fine, go have fun with your friends. And she actually seemed to be kind of excited for him a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, cool. This is good to see.
She just didn't want him to go back to prison.
Honestly, that's
obviously
very fair.
Yeah.
Because boy, howdy, from when she first was like, oh, fine, go do the band thing, I doubt she expected him to go to jail.
Well, and as we've seen, prison is full of mental patients that you need to guide with a remote control to get their vaccinations. There's all these jumping platforms.
And there are guards that are 3 times the size of the average human being.
They're gigantic.
Every one of
guards.
them.
In case you don't know
Almost
what we're
every
talking about, we're talking about this game.
Yeah, let's talk about this game. Blues Brothers 2000, which was released at November 17th, 2000 on the Nintendo 64 only. And it was developed and produced once again by our good friends at Titus, the Fox.
How do you think that they went into a crunch? Because, like, guys, we can't let this one slip into 2001. Like, look, they didn't do it right with the movie. We got to do it with the game.
They cut
Please.
it very close. All right. So, a lot of people listening to this may know I used to host a show called Ultra 64, and on that show, my co-host Woody Siskowski and I, we played every single Nintendo 64 game, including this one. So I have podcasted about Blues Brothers 2000 in the past, and I'm excited to revisit it and talk about it once again. So when at the end of the show, we kind of aggregated our lists of our rankings of the games, so we could make kind of the definitive final list of the rankings of Nintendo 64 games. This one came in out of 297 games. This one came in at number 249.
Ooh.
So not great, but it also could have been worse. Like, it wasn't the very bottom quadrant.
I feel like from the very first moment of this game, where you just start off in a room, I knew what the rest of the game was going to be like.
Yes.
Because I immediately was like, okay, this seems like a Banjo-Kazooie clone influenced a little bit from Mario 64, and that was it.
You nailed it.
The whole
exactly nailed
thing.
it. Now,
Minus the buddy, but yeah, you were just Banjo, no Kazooie.
It is nicely ironic that this game actually did come out in the year 2000 to correspond with the title, but it does make it 2 years late for the movie. A movie which was already kind of a flop. The game was originally supposed to release in October of 1999, which is, again, too late. It is, the ship has sailed on Blues Brothers 2000, the game, but they persevered and they released the game eventually anyway. And had they released it in 1999, they might have actually scored like a little minor hit out of it, because that was the peak of when people were buying Nintendo 64s. You know, it was 1999. That's when all the best games were out. By 2000, the PlayStation 2 would have been out already, so people were switching to that. It was a significantly more powerful console. So the N64 from here on out is just kind of on a death march until it's done. So this gets kind of lost in that shuffle. You know, it was released with almost no fanfare, with basically no marketing, and just kind of existed on shelves. And for that kind of game, I will say I found this one more playable than the other two Blues Brothers games that we played. I don't know where y'all come down on it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a different time for games than modern. I mean, they've all been different times for games, but it was a time where, like, they had mostly figured out controls and how to make things work. So the camera is better, but it's still a bit clunky.
Yeah.
The Nintendo 64 controller at the time was fine. Now, every time I touch it, I feel like I am just slowly being tortured while I use it.
So I need to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
This I hope may shock you, but this was my first ever N64 game.
And I'm so glad that this is the way we introduce you.
I think I'm a little anti N64.
We got you off on the wrong foot.
Yeah,
We got you off on the wrong foot.
There, a lot of the games that were higher up on that list, most likely, are higher up on that list because they were more entertaining and they handled the camera and the controller better. It felt better to play those games.
Yeah.
But
The controller is nonsense, though.
It is an absolutely nonsense controller. I will be the first to admit.
Look,
that. As
there's
someone who I have an N64 tattoo. I almost got that controller put on my arm, which would have been a little more my personality. I think. Now that
I
I'm thinking
think
on it.
it's a very clear reason why there is basically no other video game controller shaped like the Nintendo 64 controller, because it wasn't the best idea.
Yeah, you can't tell the gender of most other controllers.
Yeah.
This one.
Nintendo has for a long time been known as the company that just tries stuff.
That's
The
true.
Wii was wild compared to everything else. Every time we do this podcast now, I am doing it on top of a GameCube because
Yes.
I want the mic stand to be a little bit taller. But like
We
they
haven't
always
told them that you could just kind of stretch the pole up because it's just fun.
I mean, if I put it, if I stretch the pole all the way, it's still just a little bit too low. But yeah, and so this controller was one of those things, and at the time it was fine because we hadn't had better.
Yeah.
And then we had better when the PlayStation 2 came out, and everyone was like, all right, buddy.
Yeah.
We're never doing that again.
But you know, it is an interesting way to introduce yourself to this system. I can assure you.
You saying that there might be better N64 games than Blues Brothers 2000?
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I'm something of an authority, and I'm gonna say yes.
There appears to be at least 200.
Yeah, about 250 or 48 are better than this game. You do not want to see the ones that are worse.
Like to put this into reference, I just pulled up a list because I'm like, this was kind of the era where I was getting into video games.
Yeah.
2000, the year that this came out, had Diablo 2.
Yeah.
That game,
Huge game.
was huge.
Massive.
Still to this day, Diablo is a big name, and
Yeah.
people were playing Diablo 2 a lot.
Yeah.
As early as as late as 5 years ago.
So like you're probably not taking a break away from that to play Blues
Yeah.
Brothers 2000.
The Sims had just came
Sims was
out.
it's still massive in this house anyway.
The Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2.
Yeah.
One was already out. The second one came
I don't think
out.
we're going to argue that the
But-
PS2 was a work of
No, it's just
amazing.
like it's such an interesting time to release this game.
Yeah.
Because at this point, everything that it did was already done over again.
It kind of feels like a tax write-off in a lot of ways. Like we got to get this thing out the door so we can say we produced something in the third quarter
yeah,
or whatever.
like there was a contract that had to be fulfilled or something.
Like all this being said, this is far from the worst game we've played.
Oh, it's definitely far
yes.
from
Far
the
from
worst
the worst
game.
game.
It's at least playable.
It's playable. It's got some like interesting mini games.
Yeah.
Interesting, like because some of them are not politically correct.
No.
Some of them are very shocking.
Literally.
Especially in the prison system. The opening level is in Juliet Prison, and
Yeah, it's an accurate depiction of the prison system.
It's,
and how it has multiple floating
It's
platforms.
also pronounced Joliet.
Oh,
like-
excuse me.
like a
Illinois
man
boy
Joe.
who didn't know that the prison was there.
How often do I think about prison? Not very. I didn't go to prison
we are
ever.
Very different people.
I've never even been inside a police station other than when I found a license plate on the street and turned it into the police. And they were like, what do you want me to do with this? And I was like, this belongs to somebody. I don't know.
okay, Square. Oh, enough of your squareness.
But yeah, there's definitely some moments in the game where you're like,
Well, okay. Well, firstly, it's a very heightened art style. It's a very cartoony looking rendition of these characters, and I didn't mind it. Like, it's ugly, but it's consistent. You know, like they picked a style I wouldn't have picked. They all look a little bit like Ren and Stimpy characters, and they're just whatever. They're going with it. I will give this game credit for having a little bit of variety in their gameplay. In the first level, you're going from room to room in the prison, and there's kind of a different challenge in each room. So in one of them, you need to just like punch through your way through some vents in the right order. Another one, you need to, this is the politically incorrect part we talked about, you need to help a nurse inject patients with sedatives by guiding mental patients using a remote control that's like reverse oriented.
It was real ick.
It's real weird, and the depictions of the mentally challenged people here are not very
favorable
or
great,
classy.
Yeah,
but
there's also some enemies in one of the rooms where their hair is like standing up. And I was like, what's the deal in here? And someone's like, have they been electrocuted? And then they get electrocuted. Like, because this enemy, this person is just a prisoner that is just periodically getting shocked.
Yeah, I think.
And if you're touching them and they're getting shocked, it hurts you.
The implication is that they just came from the electric chair, but I think that game is misunderstanding what the electric chair does.
It's a lot of like weird, interesting, like,
yeah,
okay.
Moving on to a more positive aspect of the movie, there is some really good blues music. It starts off with Sweet Home Chicago.
Yeah.
And like the music is, it doesn't have the charm of the first Blues Brothers game we played last week because it's not like digitized, but it's definitely like it's like an in-between digitization, in between like a regular like.
It's that awkward level where it's not 8-bit, but it's still like MIDI. It's still not actual instruments being played, but it is much better tone and much closer to the actual music.
And there are some vocal samples too. Occasionally you'll just hear the backup singers go, "It's cheaper to keep her," like in the background, and it's just like
I think you're misremembering. I think you sang "It's cheaper to keep her."
I swear to God.
I heard it too.
Oh, okay. I think you two both said it was cheaper to keep her, and you were hearing your own voices.
I definitely did.
There. I promise, it's there. I'm not crazy. I tell you. Don't try and remote control me towards that nurse.
Don't put me into the padded room. Also, when the nurse would pick up the patients, she would just grab them by the neck and throw them around. It was like,
oh yeah, and an extra charming detail. After you help her with that, you need to beat the shit out of her and take her keys.
Yeah, it's a wild game. However, the levels after the prison seem to be significantly better because they are just game levels.
Yeah, we looked ahead. It's 4 levels total. Second level is just the streets of Chicago. Third level is a graveyard. And then the fourth level is the swamp.
Yeah, and in each one there's a mini game to practice rhythm to teach the Blues Brothers how to be a show band.
Yes. And yeah,
they don't know how it works yet.
Once you're out of the prison, I think the Banjo-Kazooie comparisons become even more blazingly obvious, to the point where you're actually collecting musical notes that are using the same graphical style as Banjo-Kazooie. And you're hopping and bopping your way around these cities collecting these bits and pieces. And the cool thing about doing a Blues Brothers game is that, all right, so for the N64 era, a lot of games like this we call them collectathons. You know, you run around grabbing different MacGuffins and Goo-Gaws to level up your What's It meter. You know, it's lots of stuff like that. And this is a movie that comes with a built-in premise. That's like basically the whole middle act of both of these movies is collecting Goo-Gaws in the form of your band members. So that could be a great way to structure the game. And it is the way it works to a degree. You find a band member, they teach you a dance move, because there is a rhythm action component to this game that is a little confusing. But the thing is, the band members do not reflect any of the band from the movie. What are they? It's 2 Frankensteins.
One's like a skeleton. Yeah.
A hillbilly wearing a traffic cone on his head.
It's a hat.
It's a
It's
hat.
brown.
Interestingly enough, they do have the Cowboys from the Funky Nassau do participate in the final boss battle dance off.
And you have like an Erica Badu, like the Queen Musette.
Musette.
Yeah, Queen Musette. You have her in there too. Like. But you do get to the final showdown, and it is not like a battle of the bands. It is a dance-off between Elwood and one of these cowboys.
And then once you win the dance-off, it just goes to a performance of Elwood and this assortment, the motley crew of creatures.
I thought it was interesting that the skeleton wasn't a drummer. The skeleton had a trumpet.
Or at least on the xylophone.
Yeah.
Bring, bing, 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 bing. Yeah, exactly. Like, that feels like a missed
Are
opportunity.
you stereotyping
Skeleton?
skeleton musicians?
There's no lips. Skeletons don't have lips, so they can't play the trumpet.
Or
You know what?
lungs, Or lungs.
Good point. Great point. I really didn't think about that
They
one.
are not suited for a wind instrument in general. Yeah. No, I
Brass.
agree.
It's a brass instrument.
Oh, excuse me. But wind goes into it, all right?
It's not made out of wood, though.
Sorry, I'm not
There's
a
no
hot band
reed.
boy who loves Blues Brothers. Jeez.
God, play a clarinet once.
No way. I played drums briefly in sixth grade band, and then my parents took those away from me. So, yeah. And to be fair, I would have done the same thing.
Yeah, that's
No, this game is pretty wild. It's not a disaster to the degree that like you might think it would be. Like, it is baseline playable, if very lazy, very derivative, and extremely silly. Which I think can kind of describe the movie as well. Like, both of these are things that have reputations as total bombs, total disasters, and you watch them and it's like, look, is this as good as the original? Well, in the game's case, it's better. But in the movie's case, no, it's not as good as the original, but it is serviceable. It's got a great soundtrack, and it's fun if you just want to kind of play the hits, The game, however, I think is more playable and more enjoyable than either the NES or the Super NES versions of Blues Brothers.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's...
They're definitely better than the other two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I walked off cliffs a lot.
You did. You definitely did. Yeah. It was
I have a
difficult to
drinking
not.
problem. I can't walk in a straight line.
Well, do we have anything else to say about Blues Brothers 2000 before we close out our second miniseries?
Listen to the soundtrack.
Yes, I skip the movie. Get the soundtrack.
Are we gonna rate it?
Yeah, let's give this a rating. So I'm actually curious where everyone's going to come down on this because I've talked myself into and out of this movie a lot over the course of this episode. So each week we're ranking our movies and games. We are ranking them on a scale of good movie, good game to bad movie, bad game, and then everything in between. Where are we landing on Blues Brothers 2000? J-Bam, why don't you start us off?
So I'm going to use this card, and I'm going to use this card sparingly
Oh,
in
boy.
the course of our endeavors. And I'm going to say childhood rose-tinted glasses, great movie.
Great movie. Leaping good.
And I just like, it was so intrinsic to my childhood, dancing whilst I was doing laundry to Cheaper to Keep Her. Like, I loved this movie. I have no ability to be objective on whether or not like its actual filmic qualities because I just love it so much.
Yeah.
Game, I think it's okay. I'm a little bit like sparingly of my good game. I give out it pretty sparingly, but
I'm not sure if that's the way that's supposed to work, but we haven't had many good games.
Yeah, it's true. There may not be many.
Ratchet and Clank was the best so far. But yeah, so that's my rating, and those are my caveats.
Great. Justin, how about you?
I'm definitely gonna go with okay movie, bad game.
Okay, yeah. And I think having played more N64 games, I think, that's valid. Yeah, when you compare to some of the others. Yeah.
I'd rather play Blast Corps all day.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm in the same, well, I don't know. I can't say I'm in the same boat because both of you are in very different boats. I can't straddle both boats. I'm not Jean-Claude Van Damme on two boats. I am going to say bad movie, bad game, with provisions that I kind of enjoy both. But I think objectively, if we're talking about, like, I don't have the same childhood memories of this movie, like, and I think the structure is just so derivative and very repetitive and just kind of a lesser shadow of the original. That being said, it has a lot of great music and some fun moments that are, it's not a movie you can completely throw away. And same with the game, like derivative, boring, a little pretty ugly, but it has a goofy kind of charm, and it tries a few things, which most of these games that we're playing don't really bother doing that. But that concludes our series on the Blues Brothers. Another short little mini-series. Some of them will be a little bit longer, but there's a lot of movies that are going to be in like 2 and 3 packs like this, so glad to get another series taken care of. But next week, we've got a fun one coming up for you. We are going to be talking about the 1988 fantasy film Willow. Willow, a movie I deeply love. I'm excited to get into it. I don't know if I've ever played this game.
I've heard of this movie.
Oh, you're going to have a good time with Willow. If you like high fantasy, sword and sorcery kind of goofy nonsense, it's a lot, of fun.
Could be fun.
Yeah, and it's a little sexy, too.
It's a little
Oh,
sexy.
okay.
It's a little sexy. We're talking Warwick Davis? Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, we will see you next week to expand on my thoughts on Warwick Davis as we talk about Willow. We'll see you next time.
That'll be the only thing we talk about.
It will be the only thing we talk about. Bye, everyone.
Bye.